Welcome. I'm so excited to have such a good turnout for today to listen to our rock stars of Pinckley Prize former award winners. And I wanted to tell you all a little bit about the woman who the Pinckley Prizes is named after. Diana Pinckley, that's her likeness on the banner there. She was my first boss. She hired me when I was 20 at Tulane University, where she led the marketing and university relations there. And when, a few years later, when I left Tulane and started a marketing business, Diana came along, and she had her own love and passion for the things that she loved to do. And that was things to save the city, even before Katrina. So she was always a woman who very much was passionate about women's issues, about the environment, about the edible schoolyard, about saving our coast, all of the things that today have even risen to more prominence here in New Orleans. And then when we would go on business trips, Diana would always have a bag of books on the plane. Now, this is after we would go to a university and do a branding audit, interviewing people all day, and she would sit on that plane and read 3 or 4 books on a flight. Pissed me off. I have never known anyone that could read so much, and I'd say, Diana, what are you reading? And she was the crime fiction critic for the Times-Picayune. Susan Larson was the book critic, and they were best friends. And then she would, before I would know it, I'd open the paper and see a review, like the next week, on all of those books. She was an amazing person. And unfortunately, I cannot believe that it's been over a decade since she passed. And when she passed, a client of ours said, Kathy, here's a check. And it was, not a ton of money, but enough. Let's start something that she would love in her memory. So Susan Larson and Karen Kirsting, my other former board members, Florence Andre is another board member, and a woman named Serena Jones. Is Serena here? She's not here right now. Came up with, we know exactly what to do. Let's start an award for crime fiction for a distinguished body of work for well-established authors. And let's give an award to first-time authors for a debut novel, and let's give a prize, and let's go. So that's what we've done. We've done this for 10 years. This is our 10-year anniversary. Yay. We have 20 women. And this, through a generous gift of John Pope, Diana Pinckley's husband, today we are able to have a full day of programming. And we are so excited and look toward the future with the gift of Diana's college roommate, Ann Newton, and Bill, her husband. We have been able to sustain these gifts, and we're looking for a bright future and even doing more in the future. So we're so excited about that. So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists here. On the far end, we have Maureen Corrigan. Maureen is the distinguished book critic for none other than Fresh Air and the Washington Post, so she's going to moderate our panel. We have Megan Abbott, who was our 2019 winner for body of work. We have Alafair Burke, who was our 2023 winner for distinguished body of work. We have Gillian Flynn, who is this year's winner of the Pinckley Prizes, and we'll be giving the actual prize today at 4:30. I think it's at 4:30 to 5:30 today in the Vicaret room. And then one of our first winner of distinguished body of work is Laura Lippman, another lover of New Orleans, and she was our 2014 winner. So with that, Maureen, I'm going to let you take it away.
I had asked all the panelists before, while we were in brief contact, if they would like to read a little selection from one of their novels, just to ground us, to give us a sense of their amazing voices and the worlds that they create. So I don't know if anybody wants to take me up on it, but I would love it if everybody could just give us a taste. Laura, do you want to?
It's from a forthcoming novel. It's going to be a really fast reading. Mrs. Blossom had never been upgraded in her life. That's all
Wow.
Everything else is a spoiler. What can I say?
I pull out a stack. Settle in, folks. Mine is just cool girl.
Yeah.
Men always say that as the defining compliment, don't they? She's a cool girl. I mean, the cool girl means I'm hot, brilliant, funny woman who adores football, poker, dirty jokes, and burping, who plays video games, drinks cheap beer, loves threesomes and anal sex, and jams hot dogs and hamburgers into her mouth like she's hosting the world's biggest culinary gangbang, while somehow maintaining a size 2 because cool girls are above all hot and understanding. Cool girls never get angry. They only smile in a chagrined, loving manner and let their men do whatever they want. Go ahead, shit on me. I don't mind. I'm a cool girl.
I can't believe I have to read after cool girl. So not a cool girl.
It was meant to be a harmless prank, not even a prank, not initially, an inside joke, only for the 3 of them. But now she was locking her apartment door behind 2 departing police officers. She had managed to sound appropriately earnest, but unworried when they began asking questions. After all, why should May Hanover, of all people, be nervous around police? May was the good girl, always. The one who only needed to be told once by a teacher to open a book to a specific page. The teenager who drove strictly within the limits of her learner's permit. Even her pug Gomez seemed to understand at an instinctive level why he needed to break away from his neighbor buddies to ride the building service elevator while they strutted brazenly with their humans through the lobby. May, simply put, was a rule follower, a rule enforcer, in fact. It was a trait that had helped her succeed in life, but as she had learned, could also lead to trouble.
Okay, this is from my book that comes out in June called El Dorado Drive, and really all you need to know is it's about 3 sisters, all of a certain age, middle age, and one of them is throwing a graduation party for her son. And the inspiration for this scene is a graduation party I attended. How many bishop sisters, Perry shouted, does it take to carry a cake? And then everyone laughed as the 3 sisters, Harper, Pam, and Deborah, lugged their mother's sterling silver cake tray across the yard to Patrick, his graduation robe ballooning behind him in the June breeze. On the tray sat a teetering party centerpiece, the money cake, a towering creation that had taken Pam hours to make, rolling dozens of crisp dollar bills around toilet paper dowels and glue-gunning them to a styrofoam pillar at least 3 feet high. Everyone gasped as they saw it, pulling out their cameras to capture the spectacle. Money cake, money cake. They're all the rage this year, Deborah said, clearly relieved that all her son's TV had wanted when he graduated was all-you-can-eat Buddy's pizza, a rented slushy machine, and a keg of beer pumping for all who surrendered their keys at the door. Jesus, Mom, Patrick said, running a finger along the dollar bills wrapped tight as cigars. May your road ahead be paved with gold, Pam said, throwing her arms around her son, and the wind forever at your back. I don't think that's how it goes, Perry said. May the road ahead be paved with gold, Harper replied, lighting a cigarette, but we're stuck on a cul-de-sac.
So I have had the pleasure of reviewing everybody here. Thank God they were rave reviews, but of course they were. And I just want to say a few things about the novels that you read from. El Dorado Drive, which is coming out in June, it is so fully realized about Detroit in the 70s and 80s, and as your subject, groups of women, and things get weird. Alafair's latest novel, The Note, I couldn't put down. It takes place in New York, the Hamptons, and again, a group of women, old friends, they get together in the Hamptons, and yes, things get weird, and there's something about writing that I would love to get into with both you and Gillian in particular. Gillian Flynn, let's just skip over her. She's a worldwide phenomenon, and I would love to talk with you about the twisty, turny, double helix type of writing style that people are still, I mean, it's a new subgenre of, I think, suspense writing. And Laura Lippman, I have to stop with the title because I always want to say Death Takes a Holiday. Murder Takes a Vacation. Murder Takes a Vacation, which is so much, so much fun to read, and yet has, as all of your writing does, even this one, which is a little lighter, the undercurrents of social criticism, social observation, especially about, I think, women aging, traveling on their own, and you know, kind of the courage it takes to navigate the world at a certain point. So, so many riches here, so little time, and we want to get you in on the conversation. I want to start by picking up on something you just said out there about, you know, the passage you read about May being a rule follower. And of course I identify with May. And I wonder if, even though this panel is so good at capturing the mean girl in literature, aren't writers all the good girls down deep? I don't know. I don't know if I'd say that about men particularly, like if Hemingway were here. What do you think? Is a writer the good girl because she stands apart and observes?
Well, I think to write well, you have to have a lot of empathy, and I think that, I mean, obviously men can be empathetic too, but I think, you know, women are sort of, like, I'll speak to my own family, for example, like, the son was allowed to, like, he didn't have to necessarily think about our feelings, but we had to always think about everybody else's feelings, and I think if that's ingrained in you, growing up, that you're supposed to be a caretaker, and you're supposed to, you know, see somebody else's side instead of being confrontational, that those are traits that can help in storytelling. It can also make you really neurotic, but there's maybe some truth in that. And I also think there's something audacious to write a first book, for anybody to write a first book, but I think, you know, to sit down and believe that you can tell a story in a certain, I mean, there's rule following in that, just the process of, I am going to get this done. For the most part, people say, if you novels, you're writing it for yourself. You don't have any promise that anyone's ever going to read it, let alone publish it. So.
Laura, I'm going to give up turning this on and off because otherwise I'll just project if you can hear me. You wrote a wonderful essay collection called My Life as a Villainess, and you know, you kind of talk about moving into the role, sometimes a mean girl, especially with a tweet that you tweeted about bullying girls at your daughter's school.
Yeah, but the first time I got called to the principal's office, I was in my 50s. I believe that's how it starts. And, you know, and it was because I tweeted out, there's a mean girl at my daughter's school, and I could kill her in a book. And a book was very important in this tweet. But her name won't work for a novel set in the 1960s, but I play a long game, kid. And I was literally called to the principal's office. I don't think it truly went viral, but I remember there were like some women who didn't know me who were scolding me. And I mean, villainous in the essays, I was thinking, I think everyone on this panel is a good girl. I think. I'm not sure about you, Gillian. I'm not sure how you did, but I know how Megan and Alafair would, and I know how I did. And when I wrote that, I was being very arch, but it's also derived from the title essay is about a writing lesson when I had to think about, for the first time, because I was so invested in, I'm a good girl, I follow the rules, I do everything right. And then I was like, yeah, you know, I think that man I just divorced has a different take on this. And it really was a moment, it changed me as a novelist when I had to think, it's like, oh, I'm the villain in someone else's story, but I don't identify that way. And I think it deepens the empathy that Alafair talked about. I mean, I'll neg my own early work. I think I had to learn to write deeper villains. Or I had to learn to not write villains at all.
Yeah.
That was like a writing lesson that maybe I was a couple of books in before I really grasped that the books would be more interesting if everybody was just a person as opposed to an arch nemesis or a mustache twirl.
Gillian, also, I think of you tying in with what Laura just said. I'm going to keep quoting Gone Girl, because I mean, I just keep rereading it every few years just to see how you did it. But it seems as though Nick and Amy just keep passing the torch, like who's going to be the villain in this passage, who's going to be the villain in this section of the book. And we readers keep, jumping around, sort of our affinity, our empathy with the characters keeps changing. So I don't even know what my question is, but that kind of complication of the moral universe that you managed to pull off while still telling a great story in Gone Girl, it seems to me like the best mysteries sort of do that they make things more complicated, not simply the villain and the detective or the victim.
I mean, I write dark female narrators, but to me, I never, to jump on what Laura was saying, like I never write villains. I never feel like I'm writing a villain. I feel fully when I was writing Amy, despite the lengths that she went to, and they are lengthy. Like I was sort of like, as I was writing, I'm like, this is a perfectly reasonable response to it. He's done, obviously. She's making the complete right call here. And I think to me that those are by far the more interesting characters to me than it would be like being in the in the mind of a serial killer or something that is very clearly of that, unless of course then you're with a serial killer that you felt kind of fond of in a way, I guess. But to me those are the most interesting ones, and yeah, I mean no one wants to be the villain of their story, and then you have that moment and you go like technically I guess I am the awful person here, but I think it makes for a much more nuanced mystery, and certainly at least the type that I tend to gravitate toward those.
So when I heard I was going to be the moderator for this panel, I had two reactions, seriously. The first was I thought, oh, they all know each other, and I'm going to be the girl who's on the outside, and they're not going to be nice to me. and then the second thing I thought of was, these thoughts that go through your head, right? I thought about my mom, who passed away in 2017, and who eventually moved into a retirement community. But before she reluctantly did that, she said to me, oh, don't put me with a bunch of women. And there's some truth to that. I mean, some people were mean, some women were mean to her. There's some truth to the mean girls stuff, and gosh, I'm looking at Megan because you keep giving us mean girls in different combinations, iterations, the cheer club, the gymnastics group, the research scientists, the smaller club, and then El Drive, women in an investment club. Crazy. But all of you have had greater and lesser experience writing about women and how they treat each other. And the big question is, how do you do that without just intensifying the misogynist stereotypes and yet acknowledging there's some truth to these interactions.
Is that for me? I think about it so much. Only after I finish the book, and then I have to kind of justify it. I think I'm always drawn to writing about groups of women because I went through 6th grade, and I've experienced the tyranny of groups of girls. But I guess to me, I think of it feels like women historically, I think this is all changing, but all the time, but especially now, negotiate power very differently than men because they have to, and I think it finds furtive and insular means, therefore it looks more treacherous, and it's sort of that old Seinfeld joke. Elaine says we don't beat each other up, we just give each other eating disorders, which I think is so. I think it to me it's so much more about power and privilege, and it feels sort of so important. But I think because we're writing crime fiction, we're really never writing about good people exactly, or necessarily bad people. So I think I think in large part, to me to sort of wrap it around with the previous question, I think actually good girls are much more dangerous. And in my book they often are, because they can't own their ambiguous or complicated feelings. And I guess what I like about writing a group of women is they just get to be fully themselves with one another. They get to express aggression, rage, ambition, all this stuff in that sort of free space. So to me, their outside worlds, mean girls, are actually the women that are having feelings and drives and passions. I guess that's one of the ways I think about it.
Yeah, I go out of my way not to worry, is this going to give more fuel to the fire of misogyny, or, this point of like, oh, look at that, another crazy, lady or whatever, because I remind myself of, like, male authors don't have to think about that, so I'm sure as hell not going to think about that. Like, to me, it's just sort of like, you don't look at a male writer and go like, oh, an anti-hero, what? Aren't people going to be worried that men are, alcoholic rage monsters to, beat people? And so to me, it's really important, and, sort of, it's sort of the other person's real deep issues, if that's what they read my books and leave with thinking, and to me, and it's fine to people told me quite a bit, like, oh, like I know an Amy, I was married to an Amy, I was roommates with an Amy or whatever, and I'm sort of like, sorry about that, but also I'm glad that people can actually sort of identify that, because to me that means that I'm doing my job, which is to show all different types of humans, and all, like, just as there are good women, there are also awful women, and everywhere in between, and I don't want to, be stuck writing the woman as just the likable person that you bounce along with and don't necessarily think about them much. To me, the characters I think about the most are the ones who are flawed and who do things that I don't entirely approve of or downright, shocked by, but like those are the ones who stay in my mind the longest, and what I'm the most interested in doing.
To joke on something Megan said, it's not in all of my books, but it's real in a lot of my books, that the most terrifying people are people who see themselves as being good. Because once someone is like, I'm a good person, everything I do is right, they can do some pretty terrifying and horrible things. But also, I just want to address, like, Maureen, we would never have excluded you. I just met Ashley last night, and I now feel like we're best friends. But no, actually, one of the things that's been great about being a woman in this genre is it is one of the most inclusive, affectionate. There's a reason that Sisters in Crime exist. And the other thing that I thought about coming to this panel today, I've been at this the longest of being here, almost 30 years now, and I've seen him come and I've seen him go. Gone Girl basically created a new subgenre that's never gone away and it's never going to go away. Because it's really just about what if we center women in the stories? Like, what if we just decide that a woman's life lived day to day is interesting in and of itself, and it's still going. It's never going to stop. I mean, it really is a phenomenon. And my old publisher used to say, nothing is ever as big as the mothership. And I kind of feel that's true. But it's great that 13 years later, there's still little satellite missions going on, and people are still finding things to explore.
Alafair,
One of the things I loved about the note was how closely you observed clothing. So I'm switching the topic here. I'm getting lighter. But, you know, that comes up to a greater or lesser extent in all of your work. And it's not about good girls versus mean girls, but it's about what would you call them? The quiet girl observing the queen bee or something, and
Every group's got a queen bee.
yeah.
So, yeah, but and that kind of dovetails to what I was going to add to what other people were saying, is that, you know, some of my most recent books, instead of being domestic suspense from like a marriage without a relationship, are complicated female relationships. So I've written a book about sisters, and the note is three female friends who've known each other a really long time, but they've kind of moved in and out of each other's lives, and they get back together for a girls' weekend and then wind up in the middle of a police investigation, the way these things happen. But I didn't realize the thing about clothes until your lovely review pointed it out. But I think without knowing it, it's, you know, they say show don't tell, like the clothes that these women wear and the way they choose them and how little or lots of thought they give to them reveals something about character. So like May is like fretting like crazy as she's packing because she hasn't seen these women for so long, and she thinks of these other women as more fabulous, and you know, she's going to the Hamptons where everybody's going to be dressed like in expensive party dresses, and she's like, I just have a black t-shirt dress. Like maybe I'll throw it on with a bangle, and that's about as fancy as she can get. And then she picks up her friend Lauren at the airport, and Lauren's wearing like peach-colored gauchos and a silk-wrapped top and big clogs and big sunglasses, like, you know, something Diana Ross would have worn in the 70s, and like is so effortless about it. And May thinks to herself how fabulous Lauren looks, but if she tried to wear something like that, people would tell her how great it was that she was able to get around by herself. like, not quite right. And, you know, and then Kelsey like wears overalls and a tank top and like, you know, manages to look perfect. And so, and I think that kind of just set the vibe for these three women, and, you know, made clear who the queen bee is, and who's second-guessing everything. May's always second-guessing herself.
Yeah, clothes are fun. Laura, you had the Instagram, I keep saying post, and that's probably not the right term, but anyway, you were on Instagram during COVID, and I followed you because it was so much fun to see the different outfits you were putting on to kind of lift spirits, I guess.
I mean, that was a crazy time, wasn't it? Actually, one of the things I love about the note is it's a COVID novel. And I actually have a real affection for people who have taken on, well, it's kind of a post-COVID novel.
Since I don't call it COVID novel, nobody will want to read it.
It's great though, because it's about people acknowledging that they went through something traumatic, and everybody's changed by it. And, you know, Michael Cunningham is here this week, and I loved his, and Elizabeth Strout's Lucy by the Sea. I mean, I think one day people are going to look at these books, and they're kind of an important document of the times. But yeah, the clothing thing, I mean, that was just such a weird time. And I was like, you know, just like, well, I mean, also, I wasn't drawing attention to it at the time. My marriage ended a month before lockdown started, so I was really going kind of bonkers. I was like, you know, home alone with my closet. But again, you talk about things that women care about. My daughter is going to turn 15 in May. She's passionate about fashion, and she like wrote an essay about how it's dismissed and derided because it's a female concern. But then, as you just noted in Alafair's book, it's a character note. It's funny, I was just reading Jamie Attenberg's newsletter this morning, and she put out the idea, she said, I've given myself the assignment to go through this work in progress and describe what every single character is wearing. Give everybody an outfit, no matter how minor they are. And I thought, that's a cool writing challenge. So, yeah, it was a creative outlet as much as anything else. Like, you just make mix this with that, do this with that, try not to scream into the void kind of thing.
You and Megan have both written historical novels in a sense. I mean,
Yeah.
you go back to your hometown of Baltimore in the 60s and Lady in the Lake, and Megan, the new novel is Detroit, 70s, 80s. Of course, clothes is part of the historical research, the clothes topic, because it's fun to read what these women are wearing then, in addition to everything else that goes into building that world of the past. So, I don't know, would you talk about how it differs to go back to, in a sense, your own past, the place that helped form you, but also you're having to do some real historical research to be true to that world and bring it to life. Like, how are the aims different in a novel like that?
I mean, I think so. It was amazing how much research I ended up doing for a time I lived through, and that was not. I'm from a suburb of Detroit called Grosse Pointe, and it's like super WASP. It's like Eisenhower is still president in Detroit, and it really is that kind of. And I never thought about how specific it was. This is the way we think about our own hometowns until being gone now for decades, and so much of it was recalling that kind of shaggy WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant WASP, that sort of shaggy style of like shirts that are 30 years old and the cuffs loose and no socks and lots of seersucker and madras, and the men wear plaid pants, and now it all seemed crazy to me, but I realized how much it would tell so much of the story, because Detroit, when the auto industry collapsed, all the money went away from Grosse Pointe, which is where all the auto people lived. So they all had these sort of garments of their more vibrant past, and they were sort of riding on them in this sort of masquerade. And so I think, clothes in that way can be such a tool, but it was also a tunnel for me back in time, because I would look at LL Bean catalogs from 1987, and I would just be like, oh my God, I never had the right sweater all through high school, which is how I felt all the time there. So I do think sometimes it can be the most emotionally piercing too. I don't know if you feel that way to return to.
I mean, I was returning to a time when I was really little, and so I was researching 1966. How many writers are in the room? Yeah. So this is actually just even when you're working with the pretty near past, my thing has always been to go to the library and get out the newspaper microfiche and look at the ads. And look at the ads, and like when I wrote, I just forgot the name, when I wrote Let the Dead Know, like 17 magazine, it's the ads that tell us so much about what are we yearning for, what is culture about, and for like a novel set in 66, I really paid attention to how the department store ads changed, and how the clothes, just even the presentation, the line drawings, and that's always been, even with the near past, I mean, I wrote a COVID novel. I'm proud of my COVID novel. And I used my own journals. My own journals were invaluable to just be reminded of certain bizarre things that happened in 2020 and 2021.
I did a panel on book banning yesterday, which is, a concern, I think, to probably all of us in this room. I've done a lot of research about book banning, did a 24-lecture course for the great courses, The Inquisition to Critical Race Theory. What fascinated me, because I love detective fiction, is that detective fiction, mystery fiction, crime fiction, suspense fiction, all the genres, that really they really haven't been a target of book bans. You'll see once in a while like a little isolated case of somebody's trying to teach, I don't know, the big sleep somewhere, and there's a little bit of discomfort. But you would think that a genre filled with death, murder, violence, lots of drinking, illicit sex, whatever, I don't know,
that it would be a target. In a way, it's a compliment, I think, to the power of a book to be banned. And I wonder if it's because the banning community, the banning groups somehow think that detective fiction, mystery fiction, suspense fiction, they're just not significant enough still. If it's this backward way of still dissing this genre. That's my theory. I'm trying it out on you.
I'm gonna be so go ahead, Alafair, you have something to say. Go ahead. I don't want to jump in.
Well, I'm just like, oh, why isn't someone banning me? But I also wonder if it's, I mean, I think I'll say it, I think the people who want to ban books haven't read them. And I think it's possible that they think detective stories are still ones where the cops are the good guys, and there's bad guys, and the rules win, and law and order, and lock them up. And if they're not reading the genre, they probably don't realize that we're getting away with doing some pretty subversive stuff that would make them really mad if they knew about it. So that's my one theory, maybe.
I have kind of a not nice theory, which is that crime fiction still has a way to go in presenting people who are not white, cis. I mean, and so, because a big theme in book banning is the idea of indoctrination, and we're just not doing as good a job as we should with a variety of protagonists who represent all people and all races and all lifestyles, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it is this thing, is that the crime novel appears conservative in form, because it posits that the world has been disrupted and must be put back together again. And now, this is like, you know, I know we're all struggling with this. How do you can't write that type of novel right now. You cannot presume, so you're now writing about the small victory of justice on a very tiny scale, but the world is not going to be put back in order because the world is so disordered, and that's far beyond, like, solving this one murder, finding out what happened is not going to begin to address the larger societal chaos we're living through.
I think you're right, though. Now that I think about it, I don't think it's taken seriously enough to ban. I think that is exactly it. It's the same reason I remember when I was getting my PhD, I had to so argue to talk about crime novels. So they're not in the schools because they're not serious literature. They don't get taught that much. You know, so I do think that sounds right to me. That somehow we're skating underneath the surface.
Well, the books that are banned the most are the ones that are assigned in middle school, high school. And it's true, they're not taught there. They're not teaching. I teach a course at Georgetown on detective fiction, film noir, which is so much fun, and you all have to come. You know, beyond that, it's also exploring, as we all know, lots of stuff about a world gone wrong in those books and films. But if it's not taught in middle school and high school, or considered significant enough to teach there, then it doesn't attract as much attention, which is.
Do you think they're going to try to rewrite the Hardy Boys? Because it's that one verb that's used all the time to express amazement. Do you know what I'm talking about? The Hardy Boys are, in the old books, they're forever ejaculating something. Huzzah! Tom ejaculated. I mean, that's really...
I probably didn't know what it meant yet.
Greg is nodding. Greg knows what I'm talking about.
Do you know this book by Bobby Ann Mason, The Girl Detective, that was published by the Feminist Press? It makes that, it's so brilliant. You've got to get it. I'm sure you can get it up. It makes the same case about Nancy Drew. Nancy Drew and Bess and George are always finding hidden crevices. And Bobby Ann Mason quotes from it, you know, oh, girls, look, a little button. And they're all...
George is not even subtext. Didn't Chelsea Kane write a terrific book reimagining the life of Nancy Drew? Does anyone remember that book? It was really funny.
I'll check that out.
Well, you know, it's all been banned. Now we're opening the door for that. Well, the flip side of maybe being not thought important enough somehow to teach and thus to ban is that I think you can get away with things in popular fiction and also disseminate some social criticism and some interesting ideas that almost go under the radar. And
One thing I'm very much thinking about, Megan, is how you managed to get in, reproductive rights in your last novel, which has just flown out of my head, so that's.
I too, Beware the Woman.
Beware the Woman. And, it seemed to me like there were a few novels that were coming out around the same time. Anne Patchett's Tom Lake all of a sudden veered into, right to terminate a pregnancy, and I wasn't expecting that. So I think maybe there's a way that, I know there's a way that popular crime fiction gets to sometimes push the boundaries, whereas, high art maybe runs the risk of being shut down and censored.
There's a great, I always think of Martin Scorsese, who famously talked about B-movies in the 40s, 50s as smuggling, that they would smuggle in these important social issues. They'd be about race, they'd be about repression, they'd be about the blacklist, etc. And I thought smuggling was always such a good term, because it is kind of amazing what you can get away with if the story works, if the plot locks into motion. And I do think readers of crime fiction are particularly generous that way, even if they maybe wouldn't agree with what you're smuggling in. If the story works, I feel like they still will go with it.
What have you all smuggled in?
Well, I mean, for instance, I wanted to write, I feel like I write mysteries because I can write about everything besides a mystery. To me, the most important themes I'm exploring and the characters, and then I kind of put the mystery and build it on top of that. But that to me is the least of my interests and concerns. And so, for instance, with Sharp Objects, which was my first book, I knew I wanted to write about what female violence and aggression looked like, because you have a zillion million examples of what that looks like on a male end, that's just called literature. And but I wasn't feeling that enough, and I really couldn't. But I could not figure out how to do it for the longest time. I just had people. They would be like, "What do you think about female violence?" And be like, "Oh, it's interesting. It's different than men violence." I'd be like, "I don't know what to do," and I'd move them to a different room. I'd be like, "Go to the living room and talk about it." Well, male violence is different, and I couldn't figure out what to do with it. And also, I remember reading Mystic River, Dennis Levine's Mystic River, which is still one of my favorites, and thinking oh, he's talking about all these things that aren't the mystery, and that's how I can write about this. So, that was definitely one of mine where it was I wanted to talk about, again, generational violence amongst women, and aggression and violence, and how it looks at different ages, and then built around that, the mystery itself.
In the note, I mentioned the three friends have kind of moved in and out of each other's lives, but they're kind of back together again. They live in 3 different places, but what brought them back together again is May, the little sheriff, the little follower, has an incident on the subway where she's mouthing off to somebody, and she has one of those viral videos, and apologies to everybody named Karen. I'm sorry what people have done to your name, but she gets dubbed like a Karen by the internet, and this viral video goes around, and they Twitter makes fun of her, some of the most fun but painful pages to write, where I wrote actual tweets about her, and have May read them, and see herself through those eyes. But it turns out that all 3 of these women have been the target of social media attention, negative social media attention. May because of the viral video, Lauren because of a relationship that she's had that's become public, and then Kelsey's husband was murdered several years ago, and the true crime message board people have assumed that she did it. And so I kind of took, maybe it was when we were all locked up that we were on the internet so much, and it's social media almost becomes a form of fan fiction, where people are just crowdsourcing a fictional story about real people, and I kind of got fascinated by that phenomenon, and that it's the way people are so vicious to women in particular, almost make a character out of a woman, and so I kind of snuck that in there. There's a lot of, the 3 of them kind of talk about the role of social media, destructive role that it's played on their lives.
I think money is a great topic. And when I started writing crime fiction, I felt like a lot of the literary fiction at the time was very uninterested in money and class issues. And not to paint with too broad a brush, but there was like a part of me that's like, this is because these are being written by tenured professors and they're not actually worried about money. And I thought, well, the crime novel is always about money. I mean, James Cain was one of my big heroes. And you read Mildred Pierce, you can figure out how to open your own pie and waffle restaurant and what it's going to cost. And what, you know, it's really great that way. And that has changed somewhat. One of my favorite books of the last 25 years is John Lancaster's Capital, which is just about one block in South London and how it changes in that run up to like probably 2008, when everyone's house is becoming incredibly valuable, but it's also about to all collapse. So that was great to see someone do a big literary novel. But it was always like, people, do you remember Madame Bovary? All about the death, you know. And I was just so astonished that people would just leave this great topic sitting there, and they still do to some extent. You know, I want to know how much people pay in rent, what their car note is.
Well, to use that term, it's the granularity of crime fiction that makes you pay attention to those details. You know, I keep thinking of Murder Takes a Vacation and the whole, you know, now aging, moving through the streets, you know, you're older. I've never been ma'amed so much as I am on the streets of New York, because everyone's so polite, you know, but ma'am. And
I get called sir a lot. I'll take it. Really do, it's a thing. But yeah, you know, that's a character I created when I was in my late 40s, and I write about her a lot differently now.
Yeah.
It's interesting to be I'm 66. I don't know if I was going to say 60-something, like I'm going to be so coy about it. I'm a 66-year-old woman moving through the world, and I mean, it's not enough to say that we're invisible. That's where we all start. Like, people don't see you anymore. And then you can say, well, that's a superpower, and let's see what happens now that I'm invisible. But it is interesting, just the idea of, this transcends age, which is this, women are so often discounted and not listened to and not heard and not believed. And why do we have to keep learning that over and over and over again? But it feels that we do.
Yeah. Gosh, I could do a whole panel about this, but
I have one thing regarding age, which was just an amusing story, which is in Gone Girl I Write, Amy is at her wedding and she's describing like looking around and feeling sorry for the older women, and that like you can always tell this poor group of women older than her, and all they do is just stand around, and you know you're getting old, and that she's like the snapping rhythmically. And I was literally at a wedding last month, and my cousin and I were all like, I was like, oh no.
The whole reason Lady in the Lake exists is because I was rereading Marjorie Morningstar, as I do every year, as I assume everyone does. And I realized for the first time that at the end of the book, when Wally sees Marjorie and he's like, oh, she's so old. She was 30 fucking 9.
well, let's not talk about, was it Angela Lansbury playing?
Harry's mother.
Yes.
Anne Bancroft was 36 in The Graduate. Is that right? Yes.
Well, I want to throw out one more question and then open things up to the audience. And that is, we all know that mysteries, crime fiction, it's about close reading, and it's about helping the reader realize how unclosely you've been reading. And I don't just mean like, oh, clues are scattered here, and if you follow the clues, like with Agatha Christie, who allegedly plays fair, then you can figure out who done it. It's more, private eyes. They're observing things that maybe other people feel are insignificant. When we're reading, we tend to rate parts of the sentence as being more important than other parts of the sentence. And that's part of the
the joy of reading suspense fiction that's trying to figure out something about the world or about a relationship. So I think, Gillian, when I think about Gone Girl and the way that it keeps twisting and turning, and everything that I feel was secure ground under my feet has just been swept away, it very much feels like, oh, that's the genre that's for today. I mean, kind of relating back to something Laura was saying, that it's not about feeling secure in almost any truth that we are being told, because if somebody can spin a story and have me completely connected to that story, and the next moment it turns. And at the same time, that feels so dangerous to say, somehow we're not arriving at any truth. Although, when I go back to the Maltese Falcon, and it turns out to be fake at the end, spoiler alert. I mean, always, this genre has told us that there's no real secure ground here. I don't know if any of that was consciously in your mind when you were writing. It almost sounds like a philosophical reading of Gone Girl, but I think the genre invites that.
I agree, and to me, the ones that I respond to the most are the ones that are less, gotcha scary, that sort of cheap jump scare sort of vibe, and much more a sense of not being able to put your finger on what is wrong, just knowing that something's strange here, something's awry. I'm unsettled. I love feeling unsettled. I like that moment of this unease that crawls into you, because that stays with you, and that is what makes you want to pull back and go back into the book. Is like, I'm gonna figure out what's going on, and it's not that you're trying to figure out the mystery of like who done it. It's the mystery of why am I so crawling out of my skin a little bit right now? Like which character is causing me to feel this way? And those truly are the ones that I love, and everyone at this table, I think, writes those and feels that same way about it, as far as this kind of inexorable doom that you're kind of being pulled. You've got a rope around your midsection, you're being pulled towards something, and you don't want to go there, but at the same time, of course, you do, because you keep reading.
Shall we invite the audience to jump in? Who has questions?
I have one. I was wondering, how do you sort of memorialize the strong women in your own lives, and how do they come through in characters in your own writing, and how do you sort of make them
Trying to make me cry.
now, but they
Sorry, it actually is hard. My sister is 68, and she is much more like the character in my next novel. She's a shy person who had very avant-garde taste in music, starting as a teen, and didn't travel very much, didn't get out to see the world. And she's now in the memory unit of an assisted living facility because of Parkinson's. So this is why this book is dedicated to my sister and my late mom. So, yeah, thanks. I love you.
In a note, the three friends are going to loosely based on two friends of mine and I who take a trip once a year, and we tend to make bad decisions when we're we call them poor decisions, POUR decisions, and we'll do anything to, as some of you learned last night, I will literally do anything to make somebody laugh, and part of the trouble that they get into on this trip is one of them will do anything to make somebody laugh, and then bad things happen as a result of what was supposed to be a little prank. But I think all the books I wrote with strong women in them, it's never, people just assume it's the author, and it's never the author. It is an amalgam of other people's traits. Like the peach gauchos and the great wrap top and the funky shoes, that's my friend Liz. And when she was wearing that, I actually said, if I wore that, people would ask me if I was able to get around by myself. And my friends, one of the, of the three friends, there are three different races, and there's a conversation in the book where May, the little sheriff, wants to call the police, and her friend Lauren, who's African American, is like, we're not calling the police. And she has a talk with her about, I grew up with black brothers and a father, and I don't call police to my house because I have to take into account the risk that the police think they're the suspect. And like, that's a real conversation I've had with friends. And so, my text, I think I'm in a group text thread, like 2 different text threads represented by like 4 different people here, I think. And those text threads that I have with women, they're all day long. Like, we tell each other everything, and we help each other through problems, and we don't have to be in the same room together. And that's Meg, Kelsey, and Lauren is very much that dynamic.
It's making me think about how my therapist always asks me about the mothers in my books. They often aren't in the book, or they're very hostile. My mom was lovely, but I don't think it's very conscious. I will say I don't ever, and there is rarely a one-to-one with me. I will say though, a few of the mean girls that in my books are very good lifelong friends of mine who I love. So I consider it like Beth and my cheerleading crime novel. How about that for a sense? Is definitely based on a friend I had. So I like to honor the particular beautiful darkness of a lot of women I've known.
I didn't mean to not answer that. I would say, thank God most of mine aren't based on actual people, and I've had the same thing. Like, I remember my mom read Sharp Objects, in which there's a troubled mother in it, and she was like, she was very mom-like, and she was a reading teacher. She literally taught remedial reading to college students, and so was very much responsible for me being a writer in a large way. But she was just like, well, I really loved it, and she's such a great writer. Everything okay? And so now she'll just, like, when she reads the lines, she'll be like, dear Gil, is everything okay?
Are readers turning 80, are you conscious of age of women in your book? Because when I read something that says elderly, it sets me off.
As well it should.
I'm aware of it more and more, that's for sure. No, actually, I think part of the reason I wanted to write the book I'm publishing in June was I got called out for being ageist when I first introduced this character. And at the time, I was just like, this character is based on my mom, and she's not anti-tech because she's dumb. My mom hated tech. My mom would not work on the laptop. She just didn't care for it. She's a librarian. But yeah, I'm trying to deal with my own ageism. I was walking down Royal Street just yesterday in a hurry after I did my panel, and some guy from a bar like winked at me and raised his glass, and in my head I was like, that old man has no shot with me. He's like, he's probably younger than I am. It's a process, as we say.
I co-authored with Mary Higgins Clark into her 90s, and so I think that experience is, I can't think of times before then when I was, I just don't think of people as being elderly, and we had a character that we wrote together that, I can't remember how old was she, in her 70s or so. She was a widow. She was probably in her late 70s, and she was marrying like her hot young personal trainer, and the kids were against it, and and she had, Mary and I together kind of wrote this scene of her own children saw her as elderly, and she didn't see herself that way. And plus, so many people who read crime fiction, it's not necessarily always the youngest genre of readers. So I think if you respect your readers, that kind of keeps you hopefully from making those mistakes.
Yeah, I also feel like in the culture at large, when older women, whatever that means, are represented, it's usually comedic, like a joke, or or demonic. If you see a lot of thrillers, there's a whole trend of that, and they don't ever seem to be real people. And I do think crime fiction is such a good space for that. And I know Laura's new novel, the main character, I think it's such a great version of a woman who reinvents herself. At how old is she?
She's 68, right? So I was giving I talked to an interviewer too long the other day, which is when you really begin to unravel and fall apart. And I said, and like, how is your character? I said, she's much sexier than I am.
I have a question about plotting, because I think one of the reasons crime fiction gets discounted is because there's some idea that books with a plot are somehow easier to write, and we know that's not true. So I was just curious to hear you guys talk a little bit about how you get at plot, and through character, through experience. What's your sort of starting point? Do you overlay the whole thing to begin with your plots, and just a general process question about that.
Yeah, I really start with character and voice. Generally have like a 3 acts in my head, and the rest I make up as I go. and I have to fix it later. The whole pleasure of it is discovery for me, and I want to follow the voice. And I think we're all pretty voicey writers too, so I suspect.
Yeah, I don't outline, but what I normally do is I'll have not a plot, but a setup in my head. So like the setup is 3 friends go to the Hamptons for fun and bad things happen. Something very loose like that. And then I have, for me, I can't really work with that until I find the right characters. It's almost like I think of it as matchmaking in my head. Like I'll have these characters in mind and what makes them interesting, but completely divorced from plot. And then I'll think about, so Girls in the Hamptons, May's a complete control freak and a rule follower and always needs to be right and always needs to be loved and approved of. And I'm like, oh, make her the one with her friends in the middle of a police investigation, and that has promise. And then I kind of find the plot from there and let the characters kind of guide the way.
I also don't plot out to an extreme level. I mean, I used to always think that you should outline, and that was how it was just sort of done. And then I just really, at this point, I don't try to do that anymore, because I just have realized that that's just not how I work. And so I tend to write 3 books for every book that ends up being published. I mean, I really do. I will write 100 pages in the wrong direction before I figure out, like, none of this works, but at least in a way it gets me, my 14-year-old son is trying to write his first book now, and he's just like, I spent all day and I wrote on the wrong direction. I'm like, you absolutely did not. Like, you wrote in a way that helped you figure out what you wanted to write, and that's how it's like, sometimes that's how it works best, is like helping you, writing the wrong thing tells you what to write. And so, and I'm like Megan, to me, I would, for as inefficient as that is, I would never give up the magic of letting, it sounds very authory, but really, like, I always know when I have a character, that's my character, because it's she or he starts kind of determining their own, who do they want to talk to. Like, I don't want to go over here, I want to go over here, and so you kind of almost start trusting them, and that's really, I would never give up that kind of weird magic that is, in order to get a book out more quickly, personally.
I just opened ChatGPT. I used a phrase, I don't know if everyone knows it, that as we started, I was like, I think we're all pantsers up here, which means that we don't outline. And I think I met a writer at this conference one time who was like, you are one or the other, and you just, there's not a right way, there's a right way for you to do it. Yeah, I do think you talked about how we get diminished because of our plot, but it's amazing to me that people think plot is easy.
Yeah.
Like plot, like that's like our cheap little gimmick, is that we have a story.
Thank you, yes.
But it's also, I made the joke about ChatGPT because I'm actually one of the authors who's involved in the lawsuit against AI, against Meta. Some of you all at my deposition on April 15th, my second one. But one of the things I was really worried about was just that attitude, because I really saw a world in which we're all with Big 5 publishers, and if they saw a way to make money by using artificial intelligence to generate genre novels, like, I don't think they're going to come out and say, oh, you know what, we can do a novel that's exactly like Michael Chabon, we've used LLMs. But I can see a day in which they're like, well, what would be the harm for a machine to write genre fiction? So it was really important to me. I thrust myself into this lawsuit, and I don't ever regret it. I curse it a lot, because it has been a lot of work. So I just think it's so amazing to me that they think story is some cheap little bauble that we
Yeah, right,
festoon ourselves with.
If you read enough literary fiction that has beautiful prose that goes nowhere, you're so grateful for a plot.
And, you know, Nick Hornby, one time, we used to have a column in he wrote about Mystic River, that he's like, I don't understand why people think crime fiction is lesser. He said, it seems to me that if you can do what Mystic River does in terms of its prose and its characters, and on top of that, you solve a mystery playing by the rules. He said, that to me is like angels dancing on the head of a pin.
So true. I think we have time for one more question.
I so appreciated the comment about how your readers can feel a deep sense of discomfort and unease when reading about your characters. And I think what I'd love to hear a little bit about is in these times when many of us are going through life feeling a deep sense of unease and discomfort and, may I say, doom, maybe just your thoughts on how what you write in your stories interact with how people are feeling today, how your readers are feeling today, and if they offer maybe a sense of comfort and being seen, or alternatively, if they offer I can't take any more unease, so I'm gonna, look for something different. Is that a consideration at all?
I mean, in the book, so I'm in the middle of writing a book right now, which I have been for a while, but it's something I'm very aware of, but at the same time, almost as soon as I'm aware of something, I push against it, because it's the same sort of thing as like, if I realize I'm kind of basing a character sort of after someone in my life and it's too big of a character, then I realize for me, I'm cheating. I'm not really making my own character. I'm kind of leaning on this, and it's not going to be as good because of that, because I've already then confined what I'm writing about. And I feel kind of the same way about the awareness level of like, I don't ever want to chase or run away from something that's happening currently at the expense of what I'm trying to write, and I think, choosing what you write often kind of reflects that mode, and, I think there's a reason Gone Girl had its moment. It was kind of articulating where we were feeling between genders, and, it was kind of that moment. I think there will be several defining novels, and possibly mystery novels that kind of encapsulates what's going on right now. But as far as like, for me, I am literally truly not a good enough writer to go, I'm gonna write about this, and then sit down and write it. That's why like I said, there's sharp objects, is because I don't know how to go like, I'm gonna write about the general unease and terrifying nature of society right now. So that's personally how I land.
Yeah, your question has me think, because I'm struggling with it in my current book, because part of me wants to write. I always try to write what I would like to read, and part of right now, like, I just want escapism. Like, I want to like turn off all that noise that is everywhere at all times. Like in the news alerts, I'm like, he did what? And sorry, someone did what? But you kind of can't. Like, at least I can't. Like, so I can see the chaos creeping onto the page, but my books never wind up. You wouldn't know the book is like May, when you said the pandemic thing. It just crept in that May, part of her anxiety is that she was locked inside for a long time. And that kind of crept its way into the book. I didn't set out to say, oh, this character is like scarred from the lockdown. So I suspect the escapist book I'm writing right now, like, it's gonna reflect the real world. And I think that's inevitable. Like, Michael Connelly gave an interview recently where his books that are very much set in real LA, right? suddenly LA was on fire and his book was done. And he's so true to having real LA and real world in his books that he like reopened the book and found a way to update it before it got into stores, like doing it super fast. So I think writers sometimes, you know, you kind of have to bring in the real world even if you're not doing it intentionally.
Yeah, I feel like it's unconscious if you're trying not to do it. I'm always sort of wary of the ideological novel. Not that I don't share the ideology of many people writing them, but I think for me it would be dangerous to go in with an ideology. But the moment gets in there, no matter what's going on in your life gets in there. There's the cloud of doom hanging over so many of us right now. It's going to get in there. So I think that's the sort of beauty of the readers of crime fiction as one, that you have such a close relationship, the reader and writer. You're in it together. Hopefully their hearts are pounding, mine is definitely pounding, and we're kind of in it together. So I think the closest to a comfort that they can offer is the intimacy that good crime fiction can provide. And to me, that's always a solve.
Again, I know, I'm not gonna speak for anyone else on the panel, but I've talked to some writers and we're all a little bit, this is a very weird time to be trying to write a novel at all. And I'm kind of going back and forth between two different things. I sort of, without planning to, wrote Escapist Fair. Wrote this totally lighthearted book, but that's because I needed a break, because my previous book, I thought the three people in it were hideous, and I wanted to hang out with someone I liked. And I'm circling this idea. I think I'm right about it. I'm having trouble producing my daily quota of words. But yeah, I can see, you can't write about what's happening right now because your book's not going to be out for 2 years at the earliest. And I will say without, while being very vague, a couple of people have come at big issues too early. Again, love the COVID novel. There was one that I felt was too early and sort of got it wrong as a result. There are a couple of novels after 9/11 that were just too soon. And some things you need a little distance, right now, if I were trying to be strategic, and I think one of the funny things about all this is I don't think any of us is the least bit strategic. I would be like, okay, let me go back for a moment in history that's akin to this, but is not, write a historical novel, because, I've hidden out in a couple of historical novels now, and it's just time to write about the present again, for me, yeah.
I think we're out of time.
We are. Thank you all.